issue, I think it demonstrates how important it is that the government has been able, that the government should be able to implement that Rwanda plan. The problem is, of course, that hasn't happened. So these boat crossings are still coming. That sort of deterrent has not been put in place. No, I mean, I can't deny that this is nothing but disappointing news, and clearly it's bad news for the people who are doing the crossings and putting themselves in danger and everything else. But there's not really much I can say positive about this, I'm afraid.
But it's a real problem, isn't it? Because if you have 5 main pledges that you tell the British public you're going to solve before the election, and he was trumpeting last year, well, crossings are a third down on the previous year, and now they're at record levels. The only pledge that he's got any hope of meeting is to cut inflation to 2%, to near enough 2%, and yet even that, people will say, well, that's the Bank of England doing that, not you, Prime Minister.
No, I mean, I think politically it is a problem. The fact that he decided last year to make those 5 pledges. I mean, if we remember at the time, he was criticised for making 5 commitments that people thought were going to be easy to meet, and that's not proved to be true. But once you make those commitments and you stand on a platform where you say, judge me on being able to deliver on my promises, it is then incredibly difficult, clearly, politically, if that doesn't happen. So this will be something, I'm sure, that is hugely concerning to him and the team in Downing Street. And but I do believe, however, that he was right to give stopping the boats the attention and the priority that he has. I think we also have to look and acknowledge the fact that, every time he and the government have tried to implement measures to tackle this, they have been blocked and thwarted at every turn. So, I think it's politically difficult for him. I think that people are losing a lot of patience with this. But I think we also have to recognise that he has not been assisted in any way by the opposition parties. The House of Lords itself has been difficult on this issue too.
Well, clearly, I mean, difficult. Their job is to revise. I don't need to tell you your job, but the job of the House of Lords is to look at a bill and then make alternative suggestions, scrutinise and hold the government to account.
Of course it is. And that is absolutely proper, and I believe very much in the work of the House of Lords, and I firmly believe that every piece of legislation is improved by the process of scrutiny that happens in Parliament and in particular in the House of Lords. However, there are some issues that have been priorities for the government, particularly since 2019, that have not met with the approval of a lot of the political class. And that has often manifested itself with a lot of obstruction and difficulty in Parliament, which has been inspired not by wanting necessarily to do the right thing, but actually to try and obstruct something which people do not agree with.
I can sense Shola gagging to get in on the act.
Me?
Shy retiring violet, you.
I wanted to say that here's where I disagree with what you're saying. I think 2 things can be true. The first thing is, this record number demonstrates that it's totally out of the control of the government. And the second thing is, of course, it's not good news for the government, right? Because again, it shows that their approach, their policy is entirely wrong. The reason Rishi Sunak put this up as one of his 5 pledges was to, get into that whole, let's address the whole anti-woke thing. Let's use all the trigger words that we know will get some people, the politically illiterate class, all going, yes. Let's point at the migrants. They're the problems. They're the ones trying to take our jobs. This island is too small. All of that usual narrative. That's why he put it on there. If his policy...
But it is a problem, isn't it?
Of course it's a problem, because we are not addressing it the way we should. We are not addressing it the way we should. And the way we should address this is not by dealing and treating migrants as though, by dehumanizing them. That's the wrong way. We are not trying to create safe legal routes. We are criminalizing the very people that we should be helping. We say that that the migrants are being manipulated and being exploited by these criminal gangs. Rwanda is not the answer to the criminal gangs. If anything, it shows that Rwanda is not a deterrent to those who are fleeing because of life and liberty, because they feel safer, and perhaps yes, they've got connections to this country, which is why they're coming here. So if anything, this record number in the last 3 or 4 months in 2024 alone should be a huge message to Rishi Sunak and Tory party. Your policy is wrong. Your approach is wrong.
What's the right approach? What's the right policy? If you were Home Secretary, and I've got to imagine that.
Oh, God, I'll turn this country upside down. I mean, first thing to do, I think, is we have to look for where we can create safer legal routes. People should not have to come here to apply for asylum. And if we have better arrangements with our neighboring countries, including France, where these applications can be made, and the country of origin, where people either from their current country of origin or neighboring countries can apply for asylum, that would be a step in the right direction. 2, we need to listen to those who are actually working with these migrants on the ground, who are seeing the real issues and the real problems. And wherever it is that we as a country, the United Kingdom, has contributed to destabilizing the country of origin they're coming from, we need to recognize that we probably hold some kind of responsibility somehow. And the third thing is, we can't be applying double standards. We can't go, oh, Ukraine, come in open arms, and somebody else fleeing another war-torn country simply because they are not white and don't come from a European country. Well, we need to have rules and we need to have all of these barriers. People see that, people respond to that. But on top of this is Rwanda. The reason Rwanda is not working is not because of the House of Lords. It's not because of the opposition party. It's because it is wrong. Pure and simple. And the more Rishi Sunak tries to push or flog a dead horse, so to speak, the more he's going to fail. It's not stopping people from coming over.
Right. Sarah, of the solutions that Shola outlined there, what do you disagree with?
Not a huge amount, to be honest. I mean, the Liberal Democrats have... I might expand that on that, if you don't mind. The Liberal Democrats have always said that what we need to really resolve the problem of small boats is safe and legal routes. Exactly as Shola's just said, there needs to be an option for refugees to be able to apply for asylum from other countries. They shouldn't have to come here, and that would solve the problem much, much quicker than this crazy Rwanda plan would. So that's really at the heart of it. I mean, I think the other thing that we think would really make a difference, we want to see the government, stick to its commitment of restoring the international aid budget at 0.7% of GDP, because then we could be much more influential on the ground in some of these countries where, the disruption and the, people are being unsettled.
More than virtually any other country.
Nevertheless, you think about that, the difference we could make to stop people needing to flee their home countries in the first place. It is about the safe and legal routes. But I just want to pick up on what Tina was saying there about the House of Lords. I find it extraordinary that she's being disdainful about the political class, as if she herself, a former leader of the House of Lords, is not a part of that class.
I am.
And of course, but you're saying that they are the ones who are stopping this. But I mean, of course the Lords are going to be opposed to a piece of legislation that breaks international law. What do you expect them to do? It's ridiculous to claim that it's somehow being blocked, that the opposition is, it's somehow wrong to oppose this legislation. I mean, what the fundamental point about this is that there is absolutely no proof that this Rwanda legislation will have a deterrent effect, which is what the government are relying upon. And I think you just need to see that, as we have done, that the number of people still coming across in small boats, not a single person is being deterred by this. It's not working. It's fiendishly expensive. It breaks international law. The government need to try a new approach.
But the point is, on the topic of illegal immigration, because I think it's wrong to assume that everybody who is trying to get here via these channel crossings is an asylum seeker. I mean, that's...
Of course, but they could apply from other countries, and then they wouldn't need to make the crossing. waiting
But the
before we
point
made that
is,
determination.
The issue of illegal immigration is an important one to the vast majority of the people in this country. And I'm sorry, I find it quite offensive that Shola would describe them as politically illiterate.
It's correct.
But that is precisely leads to my next point, which is this is a serious topic, okay? It is the job of any government to protect their national borders, okay? It's what
They're
people
failing.
expect.
They're not taking it seriously.
It's what people expect. And when this emerged as a real priority for people, starting, sort of very much an issue back from 2016 and has grown in importance. The reason why it's grown in importance and the reason why people have become increasingly angry and the House of Lords has found it difficult to be able to discharge its responsibilities in a way that gives the public confidence that they're doing so in a way that is in the public interest is because too many of us started from a place which was one of distaste for what it was people wanted to see done.
Just nonsense.
Right, let's go to Charlotte. We haven't heard from Charlotte yet.
I mean, I do agree. I think it's unhelpful to refer to a whole group of people that are concerned by this as politically illiterate class. I do think that's problematic, and I think we should recognise that a nation should be able to make its own decisions about who is coming in and who is not, and there has to be a degree of public consent in that. And it's perfectly legitimate, therefore, to want to have a system which may restrict people coming in. I think where I'm sort of slightly, I suppose, baffled by how the Rwanda thing has become so massive in the context of dealing with illegal immigration, given there's a whole set of actions that government is taking, including a great deal of activity targeting the gangs at source to try and disrupt these horrendous people smugglers that are risking people's lives. I think it's odd that the Prime Minister has staked so much on this one policy when actually, as you said, Iain, yes, the numbers have gone up in the first quarter. We'll have to see how that settles. There are lots of reasons.
But don't you think Shola's got a point there, that it's designed to appeal, and you may object to the way that Shola put it, and I mean I do, in a sense, because even the politically illiterate have a voice, but it's designed to appeal to a certain demographic.
So if you're saying it's designed to appeal to a set of people who are concerned by illegal immigration, absolutely. I agree with you. It is designed to appeal to people who are concerned by that. And there are a great number, as Tina said, of people who are concerned. But my issue with Rwanda is it's the most wonderful example of the sunk cost fallacy, right? So, we've spent so much time and money and energy, but if we just do a bit more time and money and energy, we'll make it succeed.
Like
but
HS2.
We might disagree on that, Iain, I think, but let's park that. But what I do think is where I would slightly disagree is actually we don't know that it isn't a deterrent because it's totally bogged down. And actually, if you look at the deal struck by...
We do know it isn't a deterrent because only 200 people are ever going to go in a year-long period.
But actually,
so what kind of deterrent is that?
So I agree that if it remains as that would be the case.
And if you said all 44,000 people who come across the channel every year are going to go to Rwanda, that's a deterrent. But of course, it's not possible.
But we don't know that the numbers wouldn't increase, and also you don't know if you'll be in the 200 that goes across.
Well,
we've had no flights leaving.
If I was on the coast of at Calais and thought I had a 200 in 44,000 chance of going to Rwanda, I think I'd probably risk it.
And if that number from 200 increases, and actually that more people are,
millions of pounds have already been spent on an entirely unproven concept. It's not, good value for money.
I agreed with you. I think it's a lot of money that's been sunk in, and I don't think it's going to get to the point of working. So in that, but I think it's wrong to say it couldn't be a deterrent. If you look at the Albanian deal, the arrivals from Albania dropped 90% because the threat of being sent back to Albania was absolutely a deterrent. So it's wrong to say you can't have
we are going to have to move on because
I need to address that point. You know I need to. I do.
You may feel you need to.
No, I don't feel I need to. I think it's important to.
I'm going to move on and go to a break because it's 8:17.
Politically illiterate.
LBC.
Stowell for the Conservatives, Sarah Olney from the Lib Dem, it's Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu for, who should we say you're for?
For me.
For you. And Charlotte Pickles, who's director of the Reform think tank. Just describe us, what's your 30-second elevator pitch for the Reform think tank?
We look at how you get the state to function much more effectively and how you improve public services.
How's that going?
There's a lot of work.
Right. Our next caller is Paul in Blackburn. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Iain. Good show. Right, I would like to ask, in light that MP's got a 5% pay rise and that the energy boss has remunerated himself to £8.5 million for overcharging us for energy, would it be right for the public sector to put in a pay claim of over 5% this year?
Shola.
Sounds about fair to me. If everybody's getting a pay rise, shouldn't the people in the public sector too? But I guess, especially with all the strikes we had last year and all the pushback from the government, there is no money tree. There's not enough money, but there's enough money for other people. I don't blame him.
MP's pay is set independently. It's not set by MPs.
Yeah. We've heard that before.
Well, it's true.
No offence to the MPs.
It is true.
I do know it's true. I do know it is true. I do know there's meant to be an independent body that addresses that, yada, yada, but that's not going to... That, in the eyes of society, civil society, is not going to make a real difference because at the end of the day, they're still getting paid, right? Higher than everybody else, or they're getting a pay rise. So I think that this is a fair question to ask. There's still a cost of living crisis. People are, going to food banks. They're not getting any real support. All of the talks of inflation is up, inflation is high.
Support over the last 2 years with what the government has provided in energy subsidies, for example.
I see. Well, why don't you ask the caller whether he's felt that in his pocket? Why don't you ask the average, British
all I'm doing is
citizen?
stating a fact that the government has provided billions of pounds to support people who are experiencing difficulties.
The fact you're stating is what the government has said they are doing. The reality, that's a question you should ask. Have people actually felt a difference in their pockets? Has it actually made a difference?
They felt a difference to what they would have been paying had the government not stepped in and done this.
Is it still high? Has it made a difference to their affordability? If it hasn't, then no one's going to say, "Oh my God, thank you, that this has made a
Sarah
difference."
Olney, you know the details more than I do here. Help me out.
Well, it is true, Shola. It's the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority who set pay increases for MPs. We don't even vote on it. We just get told what it is, and then that's it. And of course, actually, quite a few different parts of the public sector, their pay is also decided independently. Again, it's not set by MPs or even the departments. Obviously, then it's up to the Treasury if they want to accept those recommendations. But a lot of these decisions are made independently, and a lot of different factors are weighed up. It'll be, inflation and, other factors. So, so it's not as if it's all MPs making these decisions. But what I would say is you are absolutely right. People are not feeling it in their pockets. Yes, there's been big subsidies for fuel bills, but people are still paying substantially more for their fuel bills than they used to be. People are paying much more on their mortgages, on their rent, their food shop at the till. What I keep hearing from constituents over the last few months is how much their insurance is going up, doubling and trebling. So people are facing higher costs in every part of their lives, and life is getting more and more difficult, even for people on reasonably good incomes. And there's no doubt that some of this, really does, come back to the government and their appalling mismanagement of the economy, particularly the Truss mini budget, which had such a disastrous impact on interest rates. So the government they absolutely have a case to answer here, not least because we're all paying more taxes because of the frozen thresholds we've experienced over the last few years and that are planned to continue in the next couple of years. There was a small decrease in national insurance at the budget, which the government were trying to spin as a tax cut, but you set that against planned tax rises. It's no tax cut at all. So the government are not doing enough to help ordinary people with the cost of living rises, which go right across all of their expenses.
What more should they have done?
Well, as I say, the frozen tax thresholds, everyone is having to pay more tax. There could have been more help with fuel bills. We've got proposals around food security, food shopping and bills, and helping British farmers to the tune of an extra £1 billion to put into British farming to help with the cost of food. There is plenty more that they could be doing.
Charlotte.
My response always to the government should be doing more is, OK, and how do you want to pay for it? So it's fine to say, gosh, taxes are so high, aren't they? And, the government have only done a tiny reduction. I mean, actually, national insurance has been cut by, a third in the space of 3-4 months? If you take the 2 cuts that we've had. I agree, taxes are really high. I mean, it's the highest sustained level in peacetime. But if you also want to spend more money...
I'm just going to answer that question, if you don't mind.
I'm very comfortable with people making the argument that says we actually are going to increase your taxes and then we'll spend more on your public services and support for various different communities. That's fine, but that's not the argument you mostly hear. You mostly hear we want to spend more money on public services, we want to have more money going into, subsidies or benefits or support more broadly. It's absolutely right. The cost of living crisis, particularly for low-income households, is obviously deeply troubling, and we do want to make sure they have the support. But you have to pay for that. And so we can't both criticise high taxes and want to see higher spending. That's just not viable. On the specific point about the gentleman calling in asked about, I think you'd have to take energy bosses and MPs very separately. So, I'd have deep sympathy with his querying, let's say, of the energy bosses' multi-million pound payments. I think that's certainly not something that would be perceived as in any way fair in the current context, given, as we've heard, some of the rises in energy bills. I think on MPs... I always come back to what sort of MP do you want? Do you want to be paying a fair wage to people who are working? Actually, it's not a popular thing to say, but most MPs, we've got one on the panel today, everyone will know MPs actually work really long hours, really care about their constituents, want to do the right thing, get a lot of abuse. It's not an attractive role to do at the moment. Actually, yes, I would like to pay our MPs fairly, and I want to expect them to do a good job as a result of it. And actually, if you look at what has happened with pay in the public sector, you take nurses, you actually take the offer on the table for consultants, even for junior doctors, that they're still striking, not accepting it. It's well above 5%. So actually, it's not a fair comparison saying in some way that MPs are getting something that the rest of the public sector are not. That's just not true. So I think we need to have a much more honest conversation about how we pay for things, actually recognising that MPs are public servants in the same way that public sector workers are, and we need fair pay deals for all of those groups, but we shouldn't be singling out MPs as sort of, some type of bad character.
Tina?
To be honest with you, there's not really much I can add to what Charlotte's just said. I mean, I agree.
Well, we're running out of time, so that's fine.
I'll take the endorsement. That's fine.
I agree with what Charlotte said. I think she's put it very well, and she's covered all the issues that I would say. So, yeah.
You wanted to come back, Sarah?
Well, just
briefly.
on the tax point, what the Liberal Democrats are proposing is that we could reverse the cuts to the bank levy and the bank surcharge, and you could levy a proper windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. We think that would raise about 15 billion over 3 years, and that's the sort of measure that we think the government should be looking at, and that's how they could be extending help to the poorest families during the cost of living crisis.
I could come back on that as to what 15 billion would do in the context of wanting to remove, to adjust the thresholds and trying to give that sort of support. The money that went into the energy bills was, as Iain said, billions of pounds. A windfall tax is, by definition, a short period. It's not a sustainable tax increase. If you're going to spend the money in a sustainable way, you have to raise it in a sustainable way, and windfall taxes do not meet that definition. So that's not a way of paying for it.
Well, a controversial suggestion here from Simon on a WhatsApp message. Tory MPs should get performance-related pay. About £2. You're listening to or watching Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:30. Time for the news headlines with Darryl Jackson.
Water companies are warning bills will have to go up to stop raw sewage ending up in England's waterways. Data's revealed the number of spills went up by more than half last year. A former health secretary has told LBC he doesn't believe attitudes towards the NHS can turn around without an improvement to social care. Lord Andrew Lansley says investment has never been enough to fundamentally change its performance. And a review into the murder of a 10-month-old baby has found he should have been one of the most protected children in the area. Finlay Bowden died with more than 130 injuries just over a month after being returned to his parents in Derbyshire. LBC weather, heavy rain drifting in from the south, the odd shower elsewhere, and lows of 2 degrees.
This is LBC.
Paul, if you think the argument's spirited on air, you should listen to it during the breaks. There was a time when I wanted to broadcast what we talked about during the breaks, but that was firmly vetoed, and it's probably just as well. Sarah Olney is with us, Liberal Democrat MP for Richmond Park. Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, she's a lawyer and political activist. Charlotte Pickles is director of the centre-right think tank Reform, and Baroness Stowell is a Conservative peer. Now, let's go to Margaret in Durham. Margaret, hello again. What would you like to say?
Hello, Iain. Over and above all that's been discussed anyway recently, I am concerned about children. I am absolutely so concerned about our children, how they're suffering. The UN decided a few months ago that the millions of children in this country labelled as living in poverty were in fact living in a state of destitution, and that concerns me a lot. We have families who can't afford to feed their children, who can't afford to clothe them properly. Their mothers are dashing out to work. We are really damaging our children, and I don't hear anybody in any political party standing up, banging on their desk and saying, children first. It's the next generation. We need to help our children.
Well, according to this report, 3.6 million children are considered to be in absolute poverty. And that's an important phrase, because often when we talk about poverty, we're referring to relative poverty. But here, they're talking about absolute poverty. Charlotte Pickles, do you think there are 3.6 million children in absolute poverty in the UK?
Well, I'm sure they have taken a measure, and that by that measure, it will be accurate. I mean, I would have several questions on that. So we obviously have a welfare system, and so most children in families that are in that kind of low-income end would be eligible for receiving things like child benefit, child tax credits, universal credit, all sorts of other benefits, support with housing. I guess there's a question about whether it's families that are not accessing the support that's available to them, because certainly the benefit system shouldn't be allowing anyone to be in an absolute level of poverty.
That's what it's there for, isn't it?
Exactly. So whether it's a question of people, as I say, not claiming things that they're eligible for, in which case, obviously, there are many advice services out there. There's lots of, you can go to a job centre, but you can also go to lots of civil society organisations that can help with that. But the general point that the caller makes, which is that we need to spend much more time talking about children in this country, and we need to recognise that actually, particularly after the pandemic, you think about absence levels from school, which makes children very vulnerable. If you're not consistently attending school, if you think about things like the growing mental health problems that are being reported in children, there is certainly a broader need to talk about ensuring that the future generations of this country are growing up in a way that is going to mean that they're healthy and productive and able to have, flourishing lives. And I think, actually, sadly, over the last few years, our Parliament, our politicians, our discussions haven't focused that much on children, and they have tended to focus on, well, as we've had so far, small boats and other topics like that. But actually, we really should be talking much more about ensuring children are growing up and having fulfilling lives.
And Sarah Olney, when we talk about absolute poverty, what we're talking about here is people who aren't able to feed their children, to clothe their children, to provide a sort of warm home for their children. Again, let me put the question to you. 3.6 million. You represent a rather rich area of southwest London, so I'm not sure necessarily whether you're the best one to ask this. But have you noticed, since you first became an MP, have you noticed more people coming to your advice surgeries, sort of contacting you in this kind of position?
I absolutely have, yes, even in Richmond Park. As you say, Richmond Park is one of the wealthier constituencies in the country, so I'm certainly not seeing, this sort of level, but doubtless that will be balanced out by constituencies elsewhere in the country which see much higher levels of poverty than I do. But I absolutely am. I think the one of the biggest issues is housing, and that more than anything. And I mentioned earlier how much housing costs are going up by, and I see people now who have got two two really good incomes coming into the household but cannot afford to pay for the housing costs in my local area. Their children are in school locally. They'll have been renting, and then their rental period will have come to an end, and it's just impossible, even on, two of them earning really, really good incomes, more than an MP would earn, dare I say, cannot afford to rent somewhere close to their children's school.
Even on 90 grand a year between them.
Yes, not just between them each, and that's the sort of. And I'm not even kidding, because if you add in the cost of childcare on top of that, which you've got a younger child, you have to pay a lot of money, and all of those other expenses that are coming in. It costs. What can I say? Richmond Park is an expensive place to live. So housing. To get back to the absolute poverty question, but housing is the absolute fundamental here. I do think, Charlotte, just to pick you up on one point you were making, we've got a 2-child limit on child benefit in this country. That's something the Liberal Democrats would remove, but that is absolutely causing a lot of the poverty that families with children are seeing, particularly those larger families, and that is causing a great deal of hardship. You're right that, of course, there should be this safety net, but if you're going to cap child benefit for 2 children, then that causes a lot of hardship for a large number of families, and that's a really, really serious issue.
Okay. It's a small number of families, but a small number of large families that's creating issues.
Well, you only need to have 3 children for that to be an issue,
which
and
most families
not,
don't. So that's why it's a small number of families.
But some do.
Well, 3.5 million does sound like a. It sounds like a very large number. I mean, it's. I don't doubt for one moment there are some families living in absolute poverty, but as Charlotte has said, what I think is quite hard to reconcile is the very sort of widespread benefit and welfare system that we have and the support that's available. Now, I take on board what Sarah has said as well, though, that, as we were talking about before the break, that people are feeling the pressure now in ways that they hadn't done perhaps 2 or 3 years ago. So situations are changing all the time and everything else. But I think it's quite important that we don't fall into this trap of sort of accepting a narrative that everything is absolutely terrible, at sort of, extraordinary levels, when I don't, as I say, doubt for a moment that there are specific people and individuals who are really, really suffering. But I just don't think it's quite as bad as some people would like us to believe that it is. I think when you go to some towns, you might see sort of concentrations. So, for instance, I was up in Blackpool a couple of weeks ago, and I think in a town like Blackpool, where it's hugely concentrated, the poverty and the struggle and sort of the extent of the sort of need up there, because the way in which a place like Blackpool over time has attracted more and more people because their housing is very cheap, and so people who are in need tend to migrate there because it's a place to go where they think they can afford. And so what's happening in a town like Blackpool is that the pressure on the services and everything else becomes even greater, and so you get a sense there that there's an awful lot of poverty. And
that is actually true, I think, in a lot of coastal towns and communities. It's not. I mean, I think you're right on Blackpool, but Shola.
I think some of the comments I've just heard from you guys, it sounds to me like you live in a bubble somewhere. And it almost feels as though you're in some kind of echo chamber. Well, that number is too big, or maybe it's not as terrible. This is the problem with, respectability politics. People can't just speak bluntly. The caller is absolutely right, and I share the same concern that she has. There are people in this country who are on welfare and are absolutely below poor. Before, welfare just kept them surviving. Now, with the cost of living crisis, they can barely put their head above the parapet. There are people who have jobs, get child tax credit, but they are absolutely poor and going to the food banks. That is the reality. So I do not understand this issue. Oh, well, let's not call it millions. Millions just sounds as though everything is terrible. It is terrible. It is absolutely awful. And the people who are bearing the brunt is for children. Who who gives a flying flamingo about other countries?
You had me going there for a moment.
I'm talking about this country. This is another deflection and distraction. What about other countries?
No, it's not.
No, I don't. We're not talking
really
about
isn't.
other countries.
It really isn't.
We're talking about here.
Every country throughout history and every country in the future will always have a group of people who live in absolute poverty.
Okay, so
that is just the way...
Why don't we go say to the 3-point-something million children, well, you better be grateful you don't live in so in that country because there are 6 million children there. But that's what it sounds like.
It may sound like it to you.
No. It probably sounds like that to anybody else. Nobody gives a flying flamingo about the comparison. We're talking about what is happening in this country and helping our children so that they no longer bear the brunt of incredibly poor political decisions. Things are being done out of their own control. They have no say in it. This is the reality. So let's not get bogged down with, is it true? Isn't it true? It's true. Well, it can't be that bad. It's bad. But this is the United Kingdom. Yes, it is. And that's why it's as bad as it is. We need to take our heads out of the sand, or wherever it is people put their fingers, and try to address the issue head on. That is what we should be focused on. And all this respectability politics. People speak bluntly. That's what you should be doing.
But Stop banging the table.
I'm sorry.
But if you take a place like Beeston, where I'm from, and which is
Nottingham,
just outside of Nottingham, so that's not a wealthy town at all. And I'm sure that within Beeston there will be some families who are really poor and are struggling in exactly the way that we've just been described. But the vast majority who we might think of as less well off and and they may be on benefits, they may be some of the mothers may be working as well, all that sort of thing. But actually, when you look at their experience, when you are living there and being part of it, it is to describe a lot of people as being this kind of giving these labels that everybody is suffering from poverty. It's a sort of what I worry about is the way we want to sometimes almost victimize people in a way that is not going to help, and it's kind of like it's because it's the situation isn't as bad as it seems that you want it to be.
Tina, did you hear a single word what I just said?
Of course I
did. And then you repeated what you just said. When I've just tried to explain to you that all you're doing with what you just said, you're victimizing people. You're the one putting a label on them. And the reality is they are a victim of poverty. And even if they come from a local town as you've described, they're poor, maybe they put a smile on their faces, they find a way to keep pushing through. That doesn't change the fact that they're living in poverty or that they're struggling. The issue here is not the name victim. The issue here is the poverty. So don't get bogged down about, let's not call them victims. And focus on the poverty so that they cannot be suffering and smiling.
We're not going to get bogged down because we have to move on. Let's say we do.
We're having such fun.
Yeah, I know, but that's the nature of commercial radio. We like to kill your fun, Shola. It's 8:47.
This is LBC.
Right, it is 8:51. We have Baroness Tina Stowell with us, Sarah Olney, Shola Mos-Shogbamimu. Do you remember all the problems I used to have pronouncing your names? I've perfected them.
You are so good. You're so good with it now. Just rolls off your tongue.
Right, let's go to which question? I've got 3 questions here, so I'm just going to randomly pick one. Stephen Darby says, what should be done to the water companies that are polluting our waterways with sewage? How can we stop this? Sarah, as a Liberal Democrat,
this is my
at the
topic.
forefront of this.
Liberal Democrats, we love sewage. Well, no, we don't love sewage. We hate sewage. But we have been banging on about this for a long time. Sorry, I beg your pardon. We've been banging on about this for a long time because there's an absolute scandal, and the figures released today they really go to show the extent to which the government and the water industry have not got to grips with this problem. We're seeing double the number of sewage discharges into our rivers in the last year compared to the year before, and in my local area, I think it's gone up by 110%. You know, we've got the boat race coming through my constituency on Saturday, and the contestants have been told not to go into the Thames because of the risk of E. coli.
We've actually got a question here on this from Iain, who says, he wants this to be the fun question, but I'm just going to introduce it now. Where should the rowers throw their cocks?
Not into the Thames because of the risk of E. coli.
Why is everyone laughing? I don't understand.
He was desperate to ask that question.
He was, wasn't he?
Anyway, the answer to Stephen Darby's question is that we really need to be taxing the water companies. We need to be fining them for every sewage discharge. Because the government have not got to grips with this issue. I think one of the things... We have a regulator, but the regulator is not fit for purpose. The regulator has been set up to ensure proper competition between companies. They don't have the powers to really enforce the law on water companies. In your news clip there, the Surface Against Sewage guy was talking about how the law needs to be properly enforced, but also doesn't have the powers to kind of impose the sort of regulatory regime that we need to see to properly protect consumers against the kind of water, their bill hikes that Thames Water have now gone to asking the government if they can put bill payers' bills up by, I think, up to 40% to dig them out of a financial hole that they've largely caused themselves, thanks to the enormous dividends they've paid to shareholders over the last 10 years. So a sewage tax is what we're proposing. Use the proceeds to implement a proper set of regulations that can be properly enforced to stop this happening. And it's long past time that action was taken on this. Okay. It's really, really disgusting.
Shola.
But aren't MPs somehow also responsible for this? I saw a post, I was about to say tweet, post by Carol Vorderman earlier today about the decision where MPs carried out, they did an account, and more MPs voted, I think last year, for there to be more sewage dumps.
Yeah, Conservative MPs did, yes.
Yeah, but I'm saying that I think Conservative MPs open the door, whoever, bottom line is MPs open the door for these increase in sewage dumps. So, punish the water companies, or shouldn't there be a penalty on the MPs too?
Various means over the last few years to tighten up the law on water regulation, particularly around this issue, and Conservative MPs have voted against it every single time.
But I don't understand how you can vote, and I don't mean you, how MPs can vote for sewage increase and dumps, right, and not have foreseen this happening.
But
I don't know either.
I think it was
they should have been able to foresee.
Complex.
No, there's nothing complex. No, I'm sorry. There is nothing complex about this. This is foreseeable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tina.
Well, unlike Sarah, I haven't spent a lot of time sort of getting stuck into sewage lately. So, I sort of come at this relatively cold in a way. But what I have learned is that this is actually very complicated, and the vote that you were referring to, Shola, I don't recall the detail of that, but what I do know, it certainly wasn't. There was an awful lot of fuss about the fact that the way MPs were voting was being portrayed as them voting in favour of sewage dumps when they clearly were not. I think what's
so what did they vote for?
This is sort of, I think this whole kind of system of the way in which the water works and the regulatory system and everything, it is so complicated that it's just not that.
But that's not an answer.
Let me say what I was going to say. So clearly what's been reported today is bad news. You know, we do not want more sewage in our water. Nobody wants that. And I think it's interesting that one of the arguments that the government makes in its defence is that the reason why we know that the sewage has gone up is because we've got this monitoring system now. So it's quite amusing in a way, because it's kind of like, you know, we have introduced a monitoring system which is world leading, and I think for one of the first times it is literally world leading, our monitoring system, in that we now know more about the contents and the quality of our water than we've ever done before. But what we're finding out is not very good, as it were. But actually,
the fact is, it's still doubled over the last year.
It's doubled over the last year. As I understand it, part of the problem is that our water system, built in the Victorian age, combines both storm water and sewage water in one pipe. And so therefore, when you get a lot of rain, like we've had over the last year, what happens is that because these two things are converging, you're going to get more sewage in the water. Not good. I'm certainly not defending that whatsoever. Now, as to what happens and what gets done about it, and the regulatory things that Sarah was talking about, I mean, I think part of the problem is, as I understand it, is that the regulators and the Parliament and the government have been pressing for lower bills over the last 10 years. So back to our earlier discussion, how can we reduce the pressure of expenses on people? So we've been trying to keep our water costs down because we want consumers' bills to be lower. But the problem with that is that then the money is not raised in terms of investment terms to deal with the pipes.
I've got to come to Charlotte quickly because we're reaching the end.
Just really to reiterate, so as Tina says, the problem is that you have a single set of pipes. And so what's happening is we've had, you know, really high levels of rainfall. What essentially the spillage is from is a kind of release, because you have the combination of the excessive rainfall and the sewage. Again, doesn't make it right, but, you know, this is decades and decades and successive governments' total failure to address the crumbling infrastructure that this country is based on. So the sewage system is one example of that. And actually, the fact that we can now measure it, by measuring it means we can levy fines. That is a good thing. We wouldn't be able to do that properly if we didn't know what was going on. I actually think the questions around how functioning both Ofwat and the Environment Agency are really good questions. My understanding, I think I read, is that they are themselves currently being investigated by the Office for Environmental Protection because they're not applying the law correctly. That's not to do with MPs or any votes. So I think there's a whole series of things here. But the fact we can measure it means we can take action, but ultimately we're going to have new sewage pipes.
Right. A fun question for the end of the programme. Eddie in London Fields says, trousers worn by Alan Titchmarsh on a gardening show have been censored by North Korea's state TV for being imperialist. He was wearing jeans. What item of clothing do you think should always be censored? I think anything that shows a midriff.
Because because you don't like your
female.
I agree with that.
What if you've got a very good midriff, though, to show off?
I was going to go with men.
There's no excuse for it.
I think baseball caps I think they work in America, but over here it's just a totally different. Yes, definitely reversed ones.
I think you guys are just jealous. I think like free speech, clothes should be free. We should go back to the 60s.
We could say black hoodies, couldn't we?
Would you leave mine alone? I love my hoodies. Absolutely love my hoodies. It's so comfortable. I don't think we should censor anything.
Okay, Charlotte.
I mean, in general, I would agree with not censoring, but if I had to be pushed, and I'm sorry if you own a pair of these, or probably lots of listeners, but men in red trousers, red chinos, thank goodness.
Totally on
I'm
your
sorry,
side.
but it's just a fashion crime, so I just don't do it.
If ever anyone spots me in red trousers,
Okay, phew.
please take remedial
Maybe I'd
action.
never be invited back by saying that, but
Tina.
that's fine.
Men in vests.
Oh,
I'd
yeah,
also
I
agree
agree
with
with
that.
that
Totally
too.
agree with that.
Some, though, are such eye candy. Come on now.
It's a bit like the midriff thing, it depends,
Steady on,
right?
Shirley.
And with those, I don't even need to wear my glasses. I take them off.
All right. Eddie, you've asked the best fun question for some time. Thank you very much indeed. indeed. Now, Monday, of course, is Easter Monday, and forgive me, but I'm having the day off. So on Tuesday, I'll be joined by, in fact, next week, we have no politicians on the panel at all. Make of that what you will. I'm going to be joined by the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, Matt Rack, and the journalist and broadcaster Grant Tucker, and the author and journalist John Elledge. And thank you all for a very spirited question, which I found very difficult to control. But thank you. Right, in the next hour, we're going to talk about bullying. Were you bullied at school? Were you the school bully? I do want to hear from people who will actually own up and admit that they were a school bully. So if you're listening, Robin Bryce, and you want to confess your sins of bullying me,